My name is KrisAnne Hall, and I'm an attorney. I'm a military Army veteran, former Russian linguist. I'm a pastor's wife. So if talking about God offends you, I'm just giving you a warning, because I do talk about God. And I'm under the firm conviction that if you want to know anything about history and anything about our founding fathers, if talking about God offends you, stop looking, because our founding fathers didn't do anything without talking about God. The Bible is the most quoted book by our founding fathers. Over 34% of the text that's quoted by our founding fathers is Scripture. So like I said, if you are offended by the Bible, stop studying your history. A wise man told me one time that it's always somebody else's fight until you get punched in the eye. And I got punched in the eye last year, and God called me to a message, and I firmly believe watching Him move and watching the doors open and shut, that He has called me to deliver this message across the country, and that's what I do. And so I would ask you to pray for me as we do this and go around the country. Next month I'll be in Texas. The next month I'll be in Colorado. I've got a chance to go to Wisconsin, Ohio, New Jersey. So this is opening up to a very large ministry for us, for me and my family. And so we need your prayers. How many of you realize that we are not battling flesh and blood?
Well,
this is a spiritual battle. And our founding fathers knew that. You see, John Adams said in 1765, 11 years before we went to battle, that we must protect liberty at all hazards. We have a right to it derived from our Maker. And what he was saying was, our founders were students of John Locke. How many of you heard of John Locke? John Locke did not invent natural law, okay? But he did put it in a way that we could understand it. God invented natural law when He breathed life into Adam in the garden. And so what we need to understand is that our founders were students of natural law. And natural law says that we are created in God's image. And because we are created in God's image, we inherit certain things. Like we inherit our eye color, our hair color, our frames and our looks from our parents. And I get my eye color from my father, and I tell you, every day I look more and more like my mother. Ladies, you can laugh at that, I'm sure. But we inherited certain things from God, and one of those things we inherited from God was freedom. We all understand that God is the most ultimate free being in the universe, right? Anybody wake up this morning and decide they were going to tell God what He needed to do? I mean, I try to tell Him how to run my life every day, but I don't really expect Him to listen to me all the time. He is gracious enough to answer my prayers, but I know He knows best. But in the garden, God breathed life into Adam and created this principle of natural law. And so our founders were students of this by their belief in God, by their work with John Locke's studies. And John Adams says we have a right to liberty derived from our Maker. Now, John Adams was writing a dissertation on canon law, which was meant to hit a very vast audience. And he thought, I'm sure, that maybe there's somebody out there that really does not believe that we were created in God's image. Believe it or not, in that day, there were people that didn't believe in God. So he says, if we've not had our liberty derived from our Maker, our fathers have bought it for us with their ease, their estates, and their blood. Now, how many of you remember just a few seconds ago what date I said that was?
1765.
1765. That's 11 years before our revolution. 11 years. So the question comes to me, right? Our fathers. Who is he talking about? Because don't you think of John Adams as one of our founding fathers? Don't you think of George Washington as one of our founding fathers? So I'm wondering, who talking about. And that's what brought me on this journey. That is what really started me in this study of our history. And what I learned was liberty as a gift from God is inherent in all its creation. How many of you, I'm sure you're sitting here because you want to know about the Constitution because you feel that there's something wrong. Did you have that moment when you started wanting to learn about what's going on, when you started wanting to be politically active, when you thought something was wrong but you just couldn't put your finger on it? You see, I believe that is evidence that liberty is inherent in us. We knew for some reason that our liberty was in danger, but we couldn't quite put our finger on it. Well, back in 1066 England, they had an idea, a concept of liberty. As a matter of fact, in England in 1066, they had the most complex form of legal government known in medieval times. They actually had courts of law. They actually had an understanding that certain liberties belonged to the people. But in 1066, the King of England dies without an heir. Now he has a second in command by the name of Harold. And everybody in England loves Harold. But he doesn't have a blood right to the throne. You understand that in order to take a crown, you've got to have a blood ascension. Well, there just so happens that William of Normandy is a distant cousin of this deceased king, and now he wants to sit on the throne. Well, but the people don't want him because he's foreign-law, William of Normandy. And so they want Harold to be their king, and there's this big battle. 1066 may not mean a lot to you, but maybe the Battle of Hastings does. We have this Battle of Hastings over the crown in England, and William of Normandy wins. Mostly because he has quite a reputation. He's called William the Conqueror as well. So William the Conqueror takes the throne and immediately starts establishing foreign law in England. He starts overturning English common law. He starts setting up arbitrary courts, judges that are loyal to him, paid by his hand. He starts taking the property from the English people and giving it to those Norman friends, literally driving them off their property. And these people understand that there's something wrong, but they have no real assertion, no real foundation to stand on, just this understanding that liberty is inherent. Well, William of Normandy has 4 sons. William I, Rufus, William II, and Henry I. William I dies in a hunting accident. He's killed by a stray arrow. When William of Normandy dies, his second-born Rufus takes the throne. But Rufus is not a desk job guy. He hates it. And so he runs off to fight in the Crusades, leaving William II and Henry I behind to sit on the throne. Now, when you're the last born and your name's Henry I and you've got 4 brothers older than you, you can probably think Henry never thought he would ever see the crown, right? Well, Henry and William II go hunting. And William II is killed by a stray arrow, leaving Henry I, the last heir, to be sitting on the throne. Now, the historians and the documents will tell you that they called this grand tribunal and there was no foul play found. Now, come on. The last heir to the throne. There are no more. Do you really think they're going to find out he did something wrong? They don't put themselves in the same position they were in when William of Normandy came and conquered, right? I'm just saying. So the people of England didn't buy this either. You guys chuckled, right? Stray arrow. The people of England were not buying it. So Henry had to make 2 concessions. He had to marry an Anglo-Saxon queen, and he had to sign on to a document called the 1100 Charters of Liberty. This was an enormous advancement for the people, the 1100 Charter of Liberties, because now they have the government recognizing that liberty belongs to the people, and it's the job of the government to protect it. As rudimentary as it was a huge advancement for them. Let me tell you what this 1100 Charter of Liberty says. It goes into, I, Henry, by the grace of God, having been crowned King of England. That's Henry's way of saying, thank you, God, for stray arrows. Will end all evil practices that have been an oppressive presence in England. Now, there's some words there that should just jump out to you. You should be wondering, what in 1100 England was evil and oppressive? Are you curious?
Yes.
Listen to this. If any baron or earl of mine shall die, his heirs shall not be forced to purchase their inheritance, but shall retrieve it through force of custom and law. In 1100 England, death tax was evil and oppressive. You don't think an inheritance tax is exactly what they're talking about? Purchasing your inheritance from the government? Try to not pay your inheritance tax and see how much of it you get. How about this? If any of my baron commit a crime, he shall not bind himself to the crown with a payment, as was done in the time of my father and brother, but shall stand for the crime, as was custom and law, and make amends as are appropriate. In 1100 England, it was considered evil and oppressive for the men who made the law to be above the law. Don't you think that's a pretty important principle for today? Well, before you start wondering about this great advancement, be rest assured that as soon as the King of England signed it, everybody in power pretty much ignored it. But it didn't go away. It was a very important advancement because in 1213, Archbishop Stephen Langton gets in a dispute with King John and Pope Innocent III. King John and Pope Innocent III are trying to tell the Protestants now how to run their church. King John is going in as collecting taxes, he's oppressing the people, he's not giving them any representation, and he's telling the churches, dictating them how to worship God. And Archbishop Stephen Langton stands up and says to the people and to the king and his people, we have this 1100 Charter of Liberty, and King, you have signed on to this by birth. You are the son of the man who signed this. You are bound to honor it. And so Archbishop Stephen Langton puts together a committee of men. And in this second committee, these men write the Great Charter. You probably know it as the Magna Carta of 1215. Without the 1100 Charter of Liberties, these people would not have had the foundation, the support, the evidence that liberty belongs to the people, and it's the government's important role to protect that. The foundation for the Magna Carta. In my humble opinion, the Magna Carta is the foundational document for every constitution written since 1215. Every constitution. Listen to this. Clause 67 of the Magna Carta says that there's to be a committee of barons, 25 barons that have the power to override the King of England. Can you imagine the common man having the power to tell the king no? If anything that the king does is out of line with the Magna Carta. Is that not an amazing advancement? Kings were set on the throne by God. They had ultimate power in those times. And now we have a committee of 25 men that can tell him no. Clause 14 of the Magna Carta says there'll only be taxation through representation. And clauses 39 and 40 are literally our 5th, 6th, and 7th Amendments that we have today. The very foundation of our Constitution rooted back to 1100 England. But it doesn't stop there. Because how many of you understand that once you have power, once someone has power, giving it up is a very hard thing to do. They do not do that easily. And that is how it was for England, because they enter into civil war after civil war after civil war for pieces of these liberties. For time's sake, we're going to fast forward to 1628. England had battled for these liberties, and now Charles I is the king, and we get another step, another advancement in liberty called the Petition of Rights of 1628. The people constantly fighting for liberty over tyranny, each time victorious. The Petition of Rights in 1628 says there'll be no taxation without representation again. There'll be no martial law in time of peace. You have a right to habeas corpus. No quartering of troops in 1628. This Petition of Rights recognized that liberty was inherited by the people and not given and doled out by the government. Continuing in these civil wars, we have to go forward to the Bishop Wars of 1639 and 1640, where again, King Richard is wanting to standardize religious practice. He's appointing bishops to enforce the rule of law in the Protestant churches because he knows an edict will not just do it. They're actually going in and enforcing the rule of law of the king over the church by force and law. And from then, we get the Grand Remonstrance of 1641. Charles I literally loses his head over this. But I want you to hear a little piece of this Grand Remonstrance, because I think as we take these steps through the advancements of the roots of liberty, it's very important for you to understand there is nothing new under the sun. Do you believe that? There is nothing new under the sun. You've already heard several instances. I've seen you shake your head where you're thinking, that's happening today. That's because the people that hate, the forces that hate liberty have the same bag of tricks, and they use them over and over and over again. And here we have the Grand Remonstrance of 1641 that says, the root of all this mischief we find to be a malignant and pernicious design of subverting the fundamental laws and principles of government, upon which the religion and justice of this kingdom are firmly established. Now again, my little linguist hat, lights on my linguist hat are blinking because there's a bunch of strong words in here, and I want to know what it is that they're talking about. Malignant and pernicious design. That's that understanding that nothing is new under the sun. That those that hate liberty create these designs to subvert the fundamental laws and principles of government. But the thing that really jumped out at me here was that they knew that these fundamental laws were firmly established. And I'm wondering, how can anything be firmly established in 1641? My goodness, they didn't have C-SPAN, they didn't have CNN, they didn't have MSNBC, they didn't even have Fox to tell them when things were going on wrong. They didn't have Glenn Beck or Sean Hannity or Rush Limbaugh to point out when their rights were being trampled on. How did they have anything firmly established? And it occurred to me, just looking at history, that they had been continually engaged in a battle for liberty now for 600 years. You see, we have all heard that our founding fathers, Adams and Washington and Jefferson and Franklin, pledged their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honors. But Adams told us in 1765 that his fathers did the same thing. And it occurred to me, in order to continually for 600 years pledge your life, your fortune, and your sacred honor over and over again, pledging the lives of your children and your grandchildren, you had to be intimately familiar with the value of liberty. You have to. So I start thinking, what is our excuse? We have all these resources. We are the most educated, the most technologically advanced, the most prosperous nation in this country. On this planet. this illustration came to me. How many of you are parents? Okay, grandparents, you count too. How many of you engage in Christmas gift giving with your child? Yeah? So you've probably been subject to the pre-Christmas list. That list of stuff that your kid has got to have, or they're just going to die. Right? Just going to die. They'll be the only child on the planet who doesn't have it. They'll be ostracized, scarred for life. They'll be warped and never grow up a normal adult unless you get them that one thing. And we're good parents. We do what we can to get what's important to the kids. Spoiling a little. I see grandparents out there. You spoil a lot. Come on, admit it. And you get them that one thing that they just have to have or they're going to die. So where is that gift 2 weeks later? I say 2 weeks because I think probably the way the society's set up today, if you buy something for Christmas 2 weeks later, you can probably sell it for near to what you bought it for on eBay. So the monetary value has not changed. But mind you, about 2 weeks later, you can pretty much guarantee that that gift is under the bed, in the closet, in a drawer somewhere. It's not lost. You know where it is. It's just not that important anymore. So what has changed? If we've established that the monetary value of this gift has not changed, what has changed? It's the value that the one who owns the gift places in it. Do you think that the value of liberty is different today than it was in 1641 or in 1215 or in 1100 England? No. Do you think God is the author of that gift, puts any less value on it today than he did then when he gave it to us in the garden? No. But we have changed. The value we put in it has changed. Because we know it's always there. You know, it's in the closet, under the shelf. We know it's always there. We can always pick it up. We've become pacified in our prosperity, lazied in our luxuries. You know, I started teaching children in a program in Florida called justicteaching.org. We have a Supreme Court Justice by the name of Fred Lewis who started this because he took a poll of the people in Florida and asked them to name all 5 rights protected in the First Amendment. There are 5 protected rights in the First Amendment, and I'm going to talk about that next hour for those of you who stay. And only 2% of the people polled could name all 5 rights. And he knew there was a problem. If you don't know what your right is, how do you protect it? How do you protect it? How many of you have heard this idea that the Constitution is a living, breathing document? I didn't ask if you believe it. I just want to know if you've heard it. Okay. All right. Now, you have now started on a journey where I have taken you from 1066 to 1641. That is roughly 600 years of people fighting for liberty with advancements in documents. You've seen that even in the 1100 Charter of Liberties, there are fundamental principles that we're looking at today. I have written a book called It's Not a Living, Breathing Document, Reclaiming Our Constitution. And it's being shipped to Ms. Harper's house. And when it gets here, I'll have it here for you guys to see and purchase if you want it. But that book and what I'm teaching you today will give you hard-line facts as to why that living, breathing document theory is a lie. You see, you have to believe that the Constitution was thrown together on a whim. That our founding fathers just woke up one day, maybe they drank too much beer, had too many fish and chips the night before, had a headache, tired of the king and his taxes, and said, hey, let's just shove all this stuff off and take on the largest army in the world on a whim. You have to believe there was no foundation to what our founders did for you to believe that the document doesn't mean anything until you put a meaning on it. And that's why it's a lie. How many of you have heard of the Glorious Revolution? Don't feel bad. I go all over the country now. Literally, less than 2% of the people I teach have heard of the Glorious Revolution. You see, I have been teaching this and studying this long enough to know that there is a malignant and pernicious design to subvert liberty. You not knowing what the Glorious Revolution is a design to perpetrate the lie that the Constitution is a living, breathing document that can be interpreted any way you want it to be interpreted. Because the Glorious Revolution of 1689 is literally the linchpin that ties our founders, our Constitution, to this 600 years of history that I've been teaching you. How many of you understand that the Revolutionary War was not a foreign war? It was not fought between Americans and British. It was a civil war fought with British citizens overthrowing their own government, the most powerful government on the world. The sun never set on the British Empire. Our founding fathers were proud British citizens that loved their king, loved their country, and they were just destroyed over what was happening. How many of you ladies have heard of Mercy Otis Warren? She is one of our founding mothers. You need to look into her. She's a brilliant, brilliant woman, and without her and Penelope Barker, I don't think that our nation would be where it is today. But they said that Mercy Otis Warren would weep over what her mother country was doing to America. They were sorely grieved. They could not understand why the mother England was literally stabbing its child America to death, were the words that Mercy Otis Warren used. Proud British citizens. Why is that important? Because the Glorious Revolution of 1688 gives our founding fathers the Bill of Rights of 1689. You see, our founding fathers did not invent liberty. Our founding fathers did not invent a constitution. They came to this country with rights that they knew were inherent from God and a line of history where the government acknowledged that it was the property of the people and the duty of the government to protect it. From the Glorious Revolution of 1688, we get the Bill of Rights of 1689. And those of you who were here in the first session have a copy of the Declaration of Independence and that list of grievances. But I'm going to tell you about the list of grievances in the Bill of Rights of 1689. You see, our founding fathers didn't even invent the Declaration of Independence. You read the Bill of Rights of 1689, there is a list of grievances against King James II that looks eerily just like the Declaration of Independence. And when you read those list of grievances against the king in the Declaration of Independence, don't they seem eerily like what's going on today? Listen to this. The brief history, because I'm running out of time, the brief history of the Glorious Revolution of 1688. King James is married to a Protestant woman and they have 2 Protestant daughters. His wife dies. He has to have a male heir or he's going to be in the same position they were in 1066. He remarries an Italian princess because that's what kings do. They marry foreign women to bring alliances and build up the realm. But at this point in time, the Pope of Rome was acting more like a prince than an ecclesiastical leader. He was more involved in politics than he was in the church, and he was bringing Roman law into England and establishing that the Catholic Church would supersede the Protestants. And the people were not having it because they had rights. They had religious liberty. They had rights. 5 ministers got together and petitioned the king, just as they had the right to petition their grievances and said, "King, we beseech you. We are not Catholic. We are not Roman. Please do not subject us to Roman law. Recognize the English common law and the laws and rights of these people." And the king arrested them, prosecuted them, and executed them just for petitioning the king for their rights. The king then turned around and created a law called seditious libel, in which it was illegal, unlawful, and punishable by death to disagree with the king about anything. And truth was no defense. You could not question the king. So they overthrow King James, and that's surely not as easy as it sounds, but they did. And we get the Bill of Rights of 1689, and let me tell you what this Bill of Rights says. Whereas the late King James II, by the assistance of evil counselors, judges, ministers employed by him, did endeavor to subvert and extirpate the Protestant religion and the laws and liberties of this kingdom. Those words, subvert and extirpate, mean to undermine, overturn, and completely destroy liberty. And in 1688 England, 1689 England, listen to what they felt was an attempt for the king to completely destroy liberty. By assuming and exercising a power of dispensing with and suspending of laws and the execution of laws without the consent of Parliament. The king creating laws, choosing which laws to support and enforce when they were not, he was not the body designed to create laws, that was Parliament. That was an attempt to completely destroy liberty. How many of you know that cap and trade did not pass Congress, our legislative body? Do you understand that the EPA, the executive body of the president, has deemed that greenhouse gases are a pollutant and therefore they have the right to write law and enforce law about it?
Yes.
How about Congress not even having the opportunity to vote on the DREAM Act, but the president passing it as law in an executive order? Creating law when you don't have the right to do it. How about the Department of Justice deciding that marijuana should be legalized, and since they can't get it passed through Congress, they're going to decide that they simply will not enforce federal marijuana laws. They don't like the Defense of Marriage Act either, and they've decided they're not going to enforce that either. That's the arbitrarily suspending laws when they do not have the right to do that. And in England, that was an attempt to completely destroy liberty. By causing several good subjects being Protestant to be disarmed at the same time when Papists were both armed and employed contrary to law. Did you know that they inherited the right to bear arms all the way in 1688? They knew that it was an attempt to completely destroy liberty to remove the arms from the people while the government stayed armed. Do you know that Barack Obama passed and signed an executive order just this past weekend that limited the gun owners' rights in California, New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas? Said if you purchase more than one gun in a week of .22 caliber or higher, you have to be reported to the federal government.
Could you explain executive order to me, please?
I can, but I don't have time right now. But an executive order, as it was supposed to be for the president to create rules on how the executive body were to run itself. And over time, it's been distorted to the point where the president can do things they're not supposed to do. In 1952, when Truman was president and he tried to take all the steel mills and put them under federal rule, he did that by executive order, and the Supreme Court said that was unconstitutional. So where is the Supreme Court today?
That's a good question.
Where is Congress today? We have a separation of powers that says when the president usurps the power of any other branch, it is the Congress's job to do something. And why are they not? Because we're so distracted by this debt mess.
Yeah.
It's an illusion. Wake up.
We're not
Now listen, I've got to close this up so you guys can get your next class, but this is a very important quote that I want to give you from John Adams, and this is from his inaugural address. I can't read you his entire inaugural address, so I've taken pieces and put them together so that you can understand the gist of it, but these are his words. If our government is negligent of its limitations, inattentive to its people's recommendations, disobedient to its authority, it is destined for some serious consequences. We will discourage our necessary manufacturers. John Adams wrote this in his inaugural address, and he's saying when the government is negligent, we will not drill offshore. We will not be able to mine for coal. We will not be able to mine for natural gas. He also said we will see a universal fall in the value of land. He said contempt of the public faith, private faith, loss of consideration of credit with foreign nations. Can you say negative credit rating? And at lengths of discontent, animosities, insurrections, threatening some great national calamity. Have we not seen our share of national calamities in the last 2 years? Adams said this in his inaugural address. If corruption is to overcome our government and can be influenced by foreign nations, by flattery or menaces, fraud or violence, terror or intrigue, the government may not be the choice of the American people, but of foreign nations. It may be foreign nations that govern us, and not we, the people, who govern ourselves.
What year was this?
This was John Adams' inaugural address. If we are to have a free Republican government, we must have an attachment to the Constitution and a conscientious determination to support it. Our founding fathers did not invent the wheel. Our founding fathers did not have a novel idea. They were not winging it. Patrick Henry said, I have one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that is the lamp of experience. I know no way to judge the future but by the past. Our founding fathers were intimately familiar with history. They had watched their fathers and grandfathers battle for liberty for centuries, and they knew the value of it. That's how they were able to stand. They came here with rights. They saw the king doing exactly what the kings had done for 700 years, and they knew from history if they stood for liberty, they would be victorious. Because the truth of victory for liberty is unequivocal. And Alexander Hamilton said, when responses are unequivocal, they ought to be held to be sacred. And our founding fathers knew that.